22 years. That's how long my mother carried this secret to every dinner table, every Christmas morning, every single I love you she ever said to my father. And she would have taken it to her grave. She almost did. But 3 weeks after we buried her, my Aunt Nadine showed up at my door with a birth record in her hands and a look on her face I will never forget for the rest of my life. The kind of look that tells you everything is about to change. Before I tell you what was on that paper, has your family ever kept a secret that completely rewrote your past? Drop it below. I really want to know. My name is Carla. I'm 38 years old, and I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in a house that always smelled like cinnamon and fresh laundry. My mother, Gloria, kept that house like it was a museum of perfect living. Floors you could eat off of, curtains ironed every single Sunday, a kitchen where something was always warm on the stove. From the outside, we looked like the kind of family other people quietly envied. And for most of my life, I believed we actually were. My father, Hank, was a quiet, steady man, the kind who fixed things without being asked and never raised his voice above a low, firm tone. He worked in pipeline logistics for 30 years, came home every evening at the same time, kissed my mother on the side of her head, and sat in the same chair every night. He loved Gloria in that deep, unspoken way that some men do, not with grand gestures, but with complete, unwavering presence. And my mother, God, my mother, Gloria Ann Whitfield Marsh, was the kind of woman people described as graceful. She was church choir on Sundays, neighborhood bake sales on Saturdays, and perfectly pressed slacks every single day of the week. She laughed easily and cried at commercials and made everyone around her feel like the most important person in the room. She died on a Tuesday morning in March. A stroke. Fast, the doctors said. She probably didn't feel much. I'm supposed to find comfort in that. Most days I can't. The 3 weeks after her funeral were the strangest of my life. Hank moved through the house like a man whose compass had been destroyed. He didn't know where anything was. Gloria had handled everything. The bills, the appointments, the kitchen, the calendar. Watching him open and close kitchen cabinets looking for where she kept the coffee filters broke something small and permanent inside me. I started going through her things slowly. Not because I wanted to, because someone had to, and Hank couldn't. I folded her clothes carefully. I sorted her jewelry. I sat on the edge of her bed for long stretches of time, just breathing in whatever was left of her. It was on a Thursday afternoon. Gray sky outside, coffee going cold on the nightstand. I was going through the bottom drawer of her bedside table when I found her Bible. Old, brown leather, her name written inside the front cover in her own neat handwriting. Gloria A. Whitfield. Her maiden name, from before she became my mother. I held it for a moment, ran my thumb along the worn spine, and when I opened it, something slipped out from between the pages and landed face up on my lap. A folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges, creased so many times the fold lines had gone soft and almost transparent. I unfolded it slowly. It was a torn section of an official document. The paper had that unmistakable government form texture, thin, slightly stiff, printed in that old typewriter font that nobody uses anymore. And even though it was only a fragment, the top half, torn cleanly away from the bottom, what was on it was enough. Mother, Gloria Ann Whitfield. Sex, male. Date of birth, June 14th, 1984. I sat there and read those 3 lines 4 times. 5 times, 6. June 14th, 1984. I was born in March of 1985, 9 months apart. My mother had given birth to a baby boy 9 months before I existed. And in 38 years of my life, she had never once said a single word about it. The coffee on the nightstand had gone completely cold. The gray sky outside had darkened, and I just sat there on the edge of her bed, holding a piece of paper that had just quietly destroyed everything I thought I knew about the woman who raised me. I didn't tell anyone that night. Not Hank, not my Aunt Nadine, not my closest friend back in Tulsa who would have driven over in 10 minutes if I'd called. I just sat in that bedroom until the darkness outside became complete, and the only light was the small lamp on Gloria's nightstand casting everything in that warm amber glow she always loved. I folded the paper back exactly the way I'd found it, placed it back inside the Bible, closed the drawer, and went downstairs and made Hank dinner like nothing had happened, like the ground under my entire life hadn't just shifted 3 inches to the left and never come back. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in my old childhood bedroom staring at the ceiling and my mind kept pulling me backwards. Not to the paper, not yet. to something older, to the feeling I'd spent most of my childhood trying to name and never quite could. See, from the outside, our family was perfect. But if you lived inside it, really lived inside it, there were these small, strange silences that never fully made sense. Moments where the air in a room would change without warning, where a conversation would be moving along fine, and then someone would say a word, or a name, or reference a year, and my mother's face would go somewhere else entirely, somewhere closed and locked and unreachable. I noticed it first when I was maybe 7 or 8. We were at my grandmother's house, my mother's mother, Grandma Ruth, who lived out past the edge of Tulsa in a house with a long porch and wind chimes that never stopped singing. Someone had brought out old photo albums, the kind with the sticky pages and the plastic film over the top. Everyone was laughing, passing them around, pointing at bad haircuts and old cars. And then my mother quietly took one of the albums and set it on her lap and just closed it, didn't say anything. Just placed her hand flat on the cover and smiled at something across the room like she was redirecting the entire moment with sheer will. I remember looking at that album later when she'd gone to help Grandma Ruth in the kitchen. 3 pages had been removed, not torn, removed carefully, completely, so that only the faint ghost of the adhesive remained where photographs used to be. Someone had taken their time doing that. Someone had planned it. I forgot about it the way children forget things that don't yet have context. Filed it away somewhere underneath years of school and friends and growing up and getting on with living. But it never fully disappeared. It just waited. The memory that came back sharpest that sleepless night, though, the one that made me press my hand over my mouth in the dark, was from when I was 16. It was late, past midnight. I'd gotten up for water and was halfway down the stairs when I heard my parents' voices coming from the kitchen, low and tight in that specific way that meant this was serious. I sat down on the third step from the bottom the way I used to do as a kid, and I listened. Hank's voice first, controlled but strained. "Gloria, I'm just asking you to be straight with me. That's all I have ever asked." And my mother's voice, and this is the part that stopped my blood cold that night on the stairs, and again 22 years later lying in my childhood bedroom, my mother said, "He doesn't even know, Hank. He will never know. That part of my life is done. It has been done. You have to let this go." Silence, long and heavy. Then Hank's chair scraped back, his footsteps, the back door opening and closing quietly. I went back upstairs. I told myself it was about money, or an old friend, or something from before they were married that didn't involve me and wasn't my business. I was 16, and I needed that explanation to be true, so I made myself believe it. But lying there that night after finding that birth record, I finally understood what my mother had meant. He doesn't even know. The baby, the boy, the birth record hidden inside a Bible in the bottom drawer of her nightstand. He didn't know he existed, and neither did I. I want to tell you about my Aunt Nadine before I tell you what happened between us. Because to understand why her behavior at that funeral shook me so deeply, you need to understand who Nadine normally was. Nadine was Gloria's younger sister by 4 years. Where my mother was graceful and composed and carefully put together, Nadine was loud in the best possible way. Big laugh, big earrings. The kind of woman who walked into a room and immediately made it warmer. She cried at weddings, sang too loud in the car, and never once in my entire life had she been anything other than completely, almost aggressively present. At every hard moment in our family, she had shown up fully. When I went through my divorce 6 years ago, she drove 3 hours to Tulsa, showed up at my door with 2 bottles of wine and a lasagna, and sat with me on my kitchen floor until 2 in the morning. That was Nadine. All the way in, every single time. So when I watched her at my mother's funeral, I knew something was wrong within the first 10 minutes. She was there, physically present, dressed beautifully, standing in the right places, saying the right things to the right people. But her eyes kept doing this thing where they'd go somewhere else mid-conversation, like she was only halfway in the room, like part of her was somewhere very far away and very heavy. I watched her stand at my mother's casket for a long time. Everyone else who approached cried openly or touched the wood gently and moved on. Nadine stood there with her hands clasped in front of her and her jaw set in this tight, controlled way, and she didn't cry, not once, not a single tear the entire day. And I know grief doesn't look the same for everyone. I know that. But this wasn't dry grief. This wasn't someone holding themselves together out of strength. This was something else. This was someone holding themselves together out of something that looked a lot more like guilt. I didn't say anything that day. I filed it away the way I'd been filing strange things away my entire life. And I got through the funeral and the reception and the long, quiet drive home. But 3 days later, I called her. She answered on the second ring, voice deliberately bright. Too bright. Hey, sweetheart, how are you holding up? I skipped the small talk entirely. Nadine, how are you really doing? Because you didn't seem like yourself at the funeral. A pause, just half a second too long. I'm fine, honey. Losing your sister is just, it hits different than you expect. I'm okay. I let it go. For 2 more weeks, I let it go. And then I found the birth record, and everything changed. I called her the morning after I found it. 8 a.m. She answered, and I didn't even say hello. I just said, Nadine, I found something in Mom's Bible, and I need you to come over. Today. The silence on her end lasted 4 full seconds. I counted. What did you find? Her voice had dropped, all the brightness gone. Just like that. A birth record, I said. A baby boy. Mom's name on it. June 1984. I heard her exhale, long and slow. The kind of exhale that carries something enormous inside it. Carla. Just my name. Nothing else. Nadine. Come over. She was at my door in 40 minutes. She'd driven from her side of Tulsa in what must have been near silence, because when I opened the door, her eyes were already red. Not freshly crying red. The kind of red that comes from crying the whole way there and then stopping just before you knock. She walked past me into the kitchen without saying a word, sat down at the table, wrapped both hands around the mug of coffee I hadn't even offered yet, just reached for it like she needed something solid to hold on to. And then she looked up at me with those red eyes and said the 4 words that confirmed every single thing I'd feared since the moment I unfolded that paper. How much do you know? I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down slowly. Placed the folded piece of paper on the table between us. Didn't say anything. Just let it sit there in the silence like the evidence it was. Nadine looked at it for a long moment. Didn't touch it. Like if she didn't touch it, maybe none of this was fully real yet. How much do you know? She'd ask me. Just what's on that paper, I said. A baby boy. Mom's name. June 1984. That's it. That's all I have. She nodded slowly. Her hands tightened around the coffee mug. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a neighbor's dog was barking at something and a car passed slowly down the street, and the world just kept moving like it had no idea what was happening at this table. His name was Christopher, Nadine said finally. Her voice was low and careful, like she was handling something fragile that had been sealed for a very long time. Christopher Aldine. He worked with your mother at Hartwell Insurance. This was 1983. Your mother was 24 years old. I didn't say anything. I just watched her face. She wasn't unhappy with Hank, Nadine said quickly, like she needed me to understand that first. I want you to know that. It wasn't that kind of thing. Hank and your mother they were solid. They were good together. But Christopher was. She paused, searching. He was this force, charming in a way that made you feel like the only person in the room. And your mother was young, and I think she just... Nadine stopped, pressed her lips together. She made a mistake. A real, human, devastating mistake. She got pregnant, I said. Flat. Just the fact of it. Yes. Nadine's voice dropped to almost nothing. She found out in September of 1983. She was terrified. Hank didn't know about Christopher. Nobody did except me. She came to me first. She was shaking so hard she could barely get the words out. I thought about my mother at 24. Young and scared and sitting across from her little sister with a secret that could detonate her entire life. And something in my chest pulled tight and painful in a direction I hadn't expected. What happened to the baby? I asked. Nadine set the mug down carefully. Gloria didn't want an abortion. That wasn't something she could make peace with. But she couldn't tell Hank. She was convinced it would end everything. The marriage, the life they were building together. So Nadine paused again. She told Hank she needed to visit a college friend in Arkansas for a few months. Some story about helping with a sick relative. Hank believed her. He trusted her completely. My stomach turned slowly. She stayed with a woman our mother knew. A church connection. Private arrangement. She had the baby in June and... Nadine's voice cracked for the first time. And she signed the papers. Private adoption, no agency. A lawyer handled it. She held him for 20 minutes, and then she handed him to a nurse and got on a bus back to Tulsa. The kitchen was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming. She never told Christopher? I asked. She told him it was over before she even knew she was pregnant. Cut it completely. He had no idea she was carrying his child. I stood up slowly, walked to the window, stood there looking out at Gloria's backyard, her rose bushes, her bird feeder, her carefully laid stone path, and tried to hold all of this inside my body without breaking apart. Nadine, I said, without turning around. You said you found the full birth record 2 years ago, in Grandma Ruth's attic. Silence behind me. Yes, she said quietly. I turned around then. You confronted her. It wasn't a question. Nadine's face confirmed it before she even spoke. I drove straight to her house, Nadine said. I sat across from her at this exact table, and I put that record in front of her the same way you just put that piece in front of me. She looked down at her hands, and she begged me. She grabbed both my hands and she looked at me and she said, Nadine's voice broke completely now. She said, Nadine, please. Hank is 70 years old. Carla has finally found some peace in her life. Please just let me carry this to my grave. I have been carrying it this long. Just let me finish. The tears came down Nadine's face quietly. No sobbing. Just tears moving steadily like they'd been waiting a long time for permission. So I let her. Nadine whispered. God help me, I let her. I kept that record in my house for 2 years, and I watched her every Sunday at church and every holiday at this table, and I said nothing. And then she died, and I didn't know what to do with it anymore. I walked back to the table, sat down, and for a long moment we just looked at each other across the place where my mother used to sit. 2 women holding the weight of a secret that had never belonged to either of us. There's a brother out there, I said. My voice was steadier than I felt. A real person who has no idea who his mother was. Nadine nodded. One slow, heavy nod. I know, she said. That's why I came. Nadine left around 4 that afternoon. We hugged at the door for a long time. The kind of hug where neither person wants to be the first to let go, because letting go means walking back into the reality, waiting on the other side of it. When I finally closed the door behind her, I stood in the hallway for a full minute, just breathing. Then I heard Hank moving around upstairs, the sound of his slow, careful footsteps above my head. The same footsteps I'd heard my entire childhood. The same rhythm, the same man. Hit me somewhere so deep and so painful that I had to press my back against the wall and close my eyes. He was 71 years old. His heart had been giving him trouble since last winter. He still slept on his side of the bed. Gloria's side remained untouched, pillow still shaped the way she'd left it. Her reading glasses still folded on the nightstand, like she'd just stepped out for a moment and was coming right back. Every morning, Hank made 2 cups of coffee out of pure muscle memory before he remembered. Every single morning. How do you walk up those stairs and dismantle what's left of a man's life? I spent 3 days with that question. 3 days of sitting across from Hank at dinner, watching him eat quietly, watching him try so hard to keep the shape of normal, and knowing what I knew. It felt like carrying a stone inside my chest that kept getting heavier every hour. I called my closest friend Dina on the second night. Dina had known my family since we were in middle school together. I told her everything. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said something that cut right through all my spinning. Carla, the question isn't whether it'll hurt him. It will. The question is whether he deserves to know the truth about his own marriage. And you already know the answer to that. I did know. I'd known from the moment I found that paper. I just hadn't been ready to admit it yet. But before I could think about Hank, before I could figure out how to have the most devastating conversation of both our lives, there was something else I had to do first. I had to find him. The boy. The man now. Whoever he'd become. Nadine had given me the full birth record before she left. The complete document, the one she'd found in Grandma Ruth's attic 2 years ago. And on it, beyond my mother's name and the date of birth, there were 2 additional pieces of information that the torn fragment hadn't shown me. The name of the lawyer who handled the private adoption, and the city where the adoptive family had been located. Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I sat at my kitchen table that night with my laptop open and my hands hovering over the keyboard for almost 10 minutes before I could make myself start. Because searching for this person meant making him real in a way he hadn't fully been yet. It meant accepting that my mother's secret wasn't just a document. It was a living, breathing human being who had spent his entire life not knowing where he came from. I started with what I had. Birth date, June 14th, 1984. Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Private adoption. I searched adoption registry databases first. The ones where adoptees and biological family members can register hoping to find each other. Nothing immediate. Then I tried a different angle. The lawyer's name on the document. A man named Gerald Foss. I searched him. He'd passed away in 2009, but his former law firm still existed. I stared at their website for a long time, knowing I couldn't call them. Attorney-client privilege doesn't just evaporate. I went back to the registries, created a profile, posted what little I knew, and then I sat back and felt the full crushing weight of what I was doing. Somewhere in Pennsylvania, there was a 39-year-old man living his life, maybe with a family of his own, maybe with children, maybe with a whole complete world built carefully around the absence of this knowledge. And I was about to knock on the door of that world and change everything inside it. I almost closed the laptop, and then my phone buzzed. A notification from one of the registry sites. A message, sent 40 minutes before I'd even created my profile, from a user who had registered 3 years ago and never gotten a response. I opened it with shaking hands. My name is Daniel. I was born June 14th, 1984, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and adopted through a private arrangement. I've been looking for my biological family for 3 years. If you have any information, I would be grateful for anything at all. I'm not looking to disrupt anyone's life. I just want to know where I came from. I read it twice. Then I put my phone face down on the table and pressed both hands over my face and cried harder than I had at my own mother's funeral. He'd been looking for us. For 3 years he'd been looking, and nobody had been looking back until now. I didn't respond that night. I couldn't. I sat with his message until almost midnight, reading it over and over, hearing a stranger's voice in words I didn't know how to answer yet. I'm not looking to disrupt anyone's life. I just want to know where I came from. 3 years he'd been waiting for someone to write back. 3 years of silence from our side. And he'd stayed patient. He'd stayed gentle. That told me something about him before I even knew his last name. I wrote my response the next morning. Deleted it 4 times. The 5th version was 3 sentences long. My name is Carla. I believe my mother Gloria was your biological mother. She passed away 6 weeks ago. I'm so sorry to reach out this way. I think we need to talk. I stared at it for a long time. Then I hit send before I could change my mind again. He responded in 11 minutes. Carla, I've been staring at my phone all morning like I knew something was coming. Can I call you? We spoke that evening, 7 p.m. Tulsa time. I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water I never touched, and when my phone rang and I saw the Pennsylvania area code, my whole body went still in a way I can't fully describe. Like everything inside me just paused, waiting. I answered, Daniel? Yeah. His voice was low and calm, a little rough at the edges, like a man who had practiced being steady for a very long time. Hi, Carla. Just those 2 words, and I was already fighting tears because he sounded real, completely, devastatingly real. Not a document, not a registry profile, a person. Hi, I managed. We were both quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that isn't awkward. It's just 2 people standing at the edge of something enormous and taking a breath before they step forward. I'm sorry about your mother, he said first, and the gentleness in it wrecked me completely. Thank you, I whispered. Daniel, I have to be honest with you. I only found out about you 3 weeks ago. I found a piece of her birth record hidden in her Bible after she passed. I had no idea you existed. None. And I need you to know that. I need you to know it wasn't. Nobody was looking away from you on purpose. Nobody knew. Silence on his end. Long enough that I pressed the phone harder against my ear just to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Okay, he said finally, quietly. Okay. Thank you for telling me that. We talked for 2 hours and 40 minutes. I know, because I looked at the call log afterward and just stared at that number. 2 hours, 40 minutes. We covered 39 years in one phone call, carefully, tenderly, the way you handle something that's been fragile for a long time. He told me about his adoptive family. Good people, he said. a couple from Harrisburg named Ruth and Gerald Moss, and something cold moved through me hearing that name, Gerald, so close to the lawyer's name on the document, and I wondered briefly if there had been a connection there I'd never be able to trace now. Daniel said they were kind and loving and had always been honest with him about being adopted. He'd known his whole life. I always wondered, he said at one point, his voice dropping slightly, not in a painful way every day. Just, you know that background hum? That question that's always just underneath everything? That was mine. What was the question? I asked. Just, why? He said simply. Not angry. Just, why? I closed my eyes. I think I can answer that now, and I think it's going to be hard to hear. Tell me, he said. Whatever it is, I'd rather have the hard truth than a comfortable nothing. So I told him everything. About Gloria, about Christopher, about the private arrangement and the bus back to Tulsa and the 20 minutes she'd held him before handing him to a nurse. I told him about Nadine and the birth record in the attic, and the 2 years of silence and the Bible and the torn paper I'd found on a gray Thursday afternoon. He listened without interrupting once. When I finished, there was a long silence, and then he exhaled. That same long, slow exhale I'd heard from Nadine, the kind that carries something enormous inside it. She held me for 20 minutes, he said. Yes, another silence. That's something, he said quietly. That's not nothing. And something in my chest cracked open completely. Because in that one sentence, Daniel showed more grace toward the mother who gave him away than I had managed to feel in 3 weeks of grief and shock and anger. But there was still one more piece, one more person in this story who deserved to know the truth. Daniel, I said carefully, did you ever find your biological father? A pause. Yeah, he said. About 2 years ago, a man named Christopher Aldine. He's living in Memphis now, retired. My breath caught. Did you talk to him? I did, Daniel said. He was completely blindsided. He had no idea my mother was pregnant. He said she ended things suddenly in late 1983, and he never understood why. He thought she just didn't want him anymore. He didn't know, I said softly, more to myself than to Daniel. No. He cried on the phone with me for about 20 minutes, Daniel said. He's a decent man, Carla. He was just someone your mother loved briefly and then had to walk away from to save her life. I thought about Christopher in Memphis, about Daniel in Pennsylvania, about Nadine carrying her guilt across Sunday dinners and holiday tables for 22 years, about Hank upstairs right now, sleeping on his side of the bed, Gloria's pillow still holding the shape of her head, all these people orbiting a secret my mother had held at the center of herself for her entire adult life. And now the secret was out, floating free in the world, and there was only one person left who still didn't know. Daniel, I said, I need to tell my father. He deserves to know. But I want to ask you first. Is that okay with you? He didn't hesitate even for a second. Carla, he said, that man loved your mother for over 40 years. Yeah. Tell him. He deserves the truth more than any of us. I told Hank on a Sunday morning. I chose Sunday because that was always the quietest day in our house. No errands, no obligations, just slow coffee and soft light coming through the kitchen windows the way it always had. I wanted him to have the whole day to sit with it afterward. I didn't want him to have anywhere to be. Nadine came with me. I'd asked her the night before, and she hadn't hesitated. I'll be there, she said. I should have been there a long time ago. We sat at the kitchen table, the three of us, Hank in his usual chair, hands wrapped around his coffee mug, looking between us with that quiet, patient expression he'd worn my entire life. The one that said he already sensed something heavy was coming, but he was going to let it arrive at its own pace. I didn't rehearse it. Every version I'd practiced in my head sounded wrong, too clinical, too soft, too careful. So I just told him the truth the way it had come to me, quietly, directly, starting with the Bible and the torn paper, and ending with Daniel's voice on the phone saying that's not nothing. Hank didn't interrupt once. He sat completely still the entire time, both hands around that mug, eyes steady on the table in front of him. When I finished, the kitchen was absolutely silent except for the birds outside at Gloria's feeder, still full because Hank refilled it every morning without fail, the same way she always had. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I reached across the table and put my hand over his. Then he said, "And I will carry these words inside me for the rest of my life." He said, She came back, though. Every time, she came back to this house. To me. That was it. That was what Hank chose to hold on to first. Nadine broke completely then. 22 years of held guilt came out of her in one long shaking exhale, and she pressed her hand over her mouth and said, "Hank, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't tell you. I'm so sorry I let her ask me to stay quiet." And my father, this quiet, steady, heartbroken 71-year-old man, reached over and patted Nadine's hand and said, "You were being her sister. That's what you were doing." I had to look away, out the window at the rose bushes, at the bird feeder, at the stone path Gloria had laid one summer weekend years ago because she'd decided she wanted a garden path, and Hank had spent the whole Saturday helping her get the stones level. He cried later, not at the table, afterward, when Nadine had gone home and it was just the two of us sitting on the back porch in the late afternoon sun. He cried quietly with his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands, and I sat beside him and didn't say a single word. Because there are no words for that moment. There is only presence. Daniel and I met in person 6 weeks later. Neutral ground, a small diner in Kansas City, halfway between Tulsa and Pennsylvania. I got there first and sat in a corner booth and watched the door. When he walked in, I knew him immediately, not from a photo. We'd exchanged photos by then. I knew him because he walked exactly the way my mother walked, that same slight forward lean, that same careful way of moving through a space like he was always conscious of the room around him. He saw me and stopped for just a second. Then he smiled. And God, it was Gloria's smile. The exact shape of it. The way it reached his eyes last. We sat across from each other and ordered coffee we barely touched and talked for 4 hours straight. At some point he said, "Do you think she ever thought about telling someone?" Toward the end, I looked at him across that table. This stranger who had my mother's walk and my mother's smile and 40 years of unanswered questions living quietly behind his eyes. And I said, "I think she thought about it every single day. I think it was the last thing she thought about." He nodded slowly, looked down at his coffee. "I found something else," he said quietly. "When Christopher and I were talking, he mentioned that your mother contacted him once, years later. Just once." I went very still. "When?" "June 14th, Daniel said. "Every year. She called him every year on my birthday. Never said much, apparently. Sometimes just stayed on the line for a minute and then hung up." The diner noise continued around us. Someone laughed at the counter. A door opened and closed. I thought about my mother. Every June 14th, picking up a phone somewhere in that perfect Tulsa house. Maybe in the kitchen, maybe upstairs, maybe sitting in her car in the driveway where nobody could hear, and dialing a number just to stay connected to the one part of her life she could never take back and never fully let go of. She never forgot him. Not for a single year. Not once. I reached across the table and covered Daniel's hand with mine, the same way I'd covered Hank's hand 3 weeks before. And he turned his hand over and held mine back. We sat like that for a long time. Two people who shared a mother we were both still learning how to love. The whole complicated, painful, deeply human truth of her. Outside the diner window, the afternoon was golden and ordinary and completely indifferent to everything we were carrying. But inside that booth, something that had been broken for 22 years was very quietly and imperfectly beginning to find its edges again.